Hello and welcome back to JP Gaming, and in today's Kerbal Space Program video we are gonna try and get this little weird contraption of a plane into orbit. Because you see, I saw a video a couple of months back, I think this was in February or something like that. I saw the YouTuber Raid Captain uploaded a video that was called "Can you use nuclear power to get into orbit in Kerbal Space Program?" And I got very intrigued indeed. It seemed like a very fun challenge to try and do, and he got very close. He got really close, and I learned a lot from that video of what to do and what not to do, of course. And in the end, after I think it was about 7 hours of trial and error, I got to this little plane here that I'm now gonna be launching from the desert runway, because when you launch from the desert runway, as you can see at the top of the screen right now, we are at 828 meters above sea level. And the nuclear engine, of course, is very inefficient inside an atmosphere overall. But as fast as you go up just a little bit, it becomes a lot better quickly, very quickly. And when you get to an altitude of around 15 kilometers, 16 kilometers, something like that, it actually functions about as well as it does in a vacuum. But yes, and that's also why this challenge is such a hard challenge, because the engine has such low thrust. I can't remember what the general thrust was of one of these engines at sea level, but it is a fraction of what it is when you get into space, which in space it's 60, I think. So yes, I did need all of these engines just to get up to speed, and as you could see in the beginning there, I also had to use the side of the runway and not the runway itself, because the runway itself was just way too short. And yes, you can also see me in the bottom right corner. That's not me speaking right now. That is, of course, my this video is from a stream that I did when I tried this out. Come check that out, by the way. I think I have a link in my bio on YouTube to my Twitch channel, where I stream a lot of Kerbal Space Program. But yes, we have now gone airborne and dropped off that first stage that was mainly used to get us up to speed and get us airborne. And I didn't talk about it when it happened, but we did drop a little bit after decoupling that stage. And now we are, of course, gaining altitude again. And I think we are coming up to the second decoupling here. And yes, it was. And I do also, between these stages, as you might have guessed, I have fuel lines, so the fuel has been fed upwards towards the next stages. And after this stage, I only have one more stage which contains just a single fuel tank and a single nerve engine. And the real challenge with this plane, if you can call it that, or spaceship thing, the real challenge was really this stage, because I needed to get this stage up to an altitude of somewhere between, I think it was 12 and 14, 15 kilometers at least, and somewhere around 13, 14 kilometers here. Yeah, you're gonna see that right now. It does become very unstable, and it wanted to flip around and it wanted to yaw from side to side. But this time I managed to get it up to, oh damn, 16 kilometers even. So that's probably why I had a little bit of extra delta V in that tank. You might also be noticing that we're not launching equatorially, and we're not launching into a prograde orbit, I think it's called. When you're launching with the rotation of the planet, we're actually launching a bit against the rotation of the planet kerbin and a bit sideways as well. But I did this just because the runway lined up perfectly with this with this angle, and I don't know, maybe I could have turned it around and managed to get into a prograde orbit, but it worked out in the end. And this was the first time that I think this was the first time I even got into space at all. I had like touched the outside or the upper parts of the atmosphere before, but I hadn't actually gone into space. Oh yeah, and I remember at this point where I got very worried when I made a maneuver node and it seemed like I didn't have enough delta V, but I knew I had. So yeah, just coasting up here, doing my circularization burn. That's a mouthful of a word. And celebrating. Yeah, I can see myself sitting down there in the corner, smiling and rocking my fists in the air of joy that I finally made this. Because I didn't think it was going to be that hard of a challenge after I had seen the video and I kind of learned, Raid Captain's video, and learned a bit about what to do and what not to do. So I did not set out for this being such a long challenge as it was. I think I said it in the beginning, I think it took me about 7 hours to get to this point where I actually got into orbit. And now we're just going to be landing this little capsule with Jebediah Kerman again. But of course, the real challenge is to get it into orbit from sea level. So I made this contraption, which basically is just a bigger version of the other one. And well, this was the main problem I had with this plane. A whole lot of almost getting off the ground launches, or just getting off the ground and then the whole thing just collapsing in on itself when I detached the bottom stage. But yes, this is we're now launching from the North Pole because I needed a very long stretch of land that was very flat, and of course we have the North Pole for just such an occasion. And I did try launching from the KSC and the side of that runway a whole bunch of times, but it is actually a little bit bumpy to the side of the runway, and I just couldn't get it to work. Because there's one bump in particular that's like right after the spaceplane hangar. If you go off to the left of the runway, there's a bump there, and that little bump always messed me up. So I decided to launch from here instead. But yes, this is basically the last craft that I flew from the desert runway, but with another stage that is a lot bigger, that is basically the same size as the whole other rocket, but a whole slew of more engines and stuff as well. So I just needed to get it into the air, and then it was pretty much smooth sailing until that second to last stage again, where I needed to get that stage up to a certain altitude, somewhere around 15 kilometers preferably, to be able to get it into orbit. And of course this was also it felt like it was a whole new challenge basically to get it to fly from sea level, just because the engines are so immensely bad at the lower altitudes. It's really crazy how bad they are at those low altitudes. But anyhow, we got it into a stable flight. I had a lot of problems with the whole craft yawing, and I had somebody in the chat telling me it was because of wind, but I've never heard of wind being a thing in Kerbal Space Program. I know there's a mod that makes wind or implicates wind into an atmospheric environment, and you can also steer like how much wind from what direction and stuff like that. But I never heard of it being in the stock game, and this is, well, kind of stock. I do have a lot of mods installed, but I'm not using any modded parts for this craft in particular. But once again, we got up to about 15 kilometers and then launched this last little stage with just one fuel tank and one engine. And I think that had about 2,500 meters per second of delta V or something like that. But of course we needed that little extra amount to work against the atmospheric forces that are pushing us back. And I think it took me, after those 7 hours of making the first one work from the desert highway, this desert runway, not desert highway, I think it took me about 5 or 6 more hours to get this version to work. It was not at all as easy as I thought it was gonna be. And I realized at the end, like in the last hour, that I could probably just go back to the spaceplane hangar and rebuild this whole thing and optimize it in a whole bunch of different ways. Like for instance, adding more wings to be able to get into flight a lot earlier, and maybe even removing some of the engines because of that, so I could get a better delta V to weight ratio and stuff, you know. But I didn't end up doing that. I just kept on trying with the same craft, and at the end it worked, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. If a craft isn't working, the best thing is almost always to not work around your problems, but to actually solve them and maybe rebuild the whole thing. Of course, depending a whole lot on a lot of aspects of the flight itself. But luckily I did get into orbit with this craft as well. So now it is proven you can get into orbit with a only nuclear powered plane or rockets, depending on how you look at it. I really hope to see others do better versions of this, because this was not a very nice looking plane, to be honest. So yes, I would really like to see others try this as well. It would be very nice to see if somebody could make a very good version of a plane like this. And that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe.